I've always been a Mario kid. Ever since I started living, well, here, I've been playing through countless of Mario's adventures growing up. Mario Bros, Mario World, Yoshi's Island, 64, Sunshine, Galaxy, and the other ones. I grew up with this mustache plumber in red basically my entire life, which is why it holds such a special place in my heart. I mean, I literally own one of every color of Yoshi. I'm an addict. I will say when I was first getting into games, I rarely went out of my comfort zone with Mario. Not entirely. I used to play a lot of Banjo-Kazooie, Rave Race 64, and of course, you know it, you love it, Magical Disney Tetris. Even when I started getting older and expanded my taste in games, getting into other genres was difficult, to say the least. One of these genres specifically that took me a while to get into was horror. Even though I do tend to like a lot of horror games now, I'd still say I'm not a huge horror fan as much as others are. I tend to hate games and movies leaning way too much into gore or deliberately over-the-top graphic scenes. I say that as one of my favorite horror franchises is Resident Evil, but I have a certain niche I've realized with them. I like the feeling of being spooked. That unsettling feeling of what lies in the unknown is a rather particular feeling, and I'd say it does a much better job at creating tension than actual horror monsters themselves. That, combined with ambience and atmosphere, can really help sell a rather creepy setting and put you on edge. And no game I feel does a better job of this philosophy than Luigi's Mansion. Now, by no means am I suggesting that Luigi's Mansion, the game that's supposed to be, you know, E for everyone, is a horror game. But despite that, it does follow some of these tropes surprisingly well. Fear of the unknown? Check. Uneasy atmosphere? Check. Losing my credibility? Check. They come together to create a rather cartoonish yet decently unsettling experience. So I wanted to kind of dissect the game and figure out why exactly it makes me feel the way it does, even after all these years later, and why its successors kind of failed to recapture that same charm. So walk with me as I slowly go over every tiny aspect of this game that's technically old enough to drink. It's older than me, actually. Now, let's take a good old trip back to the year of 1999. SpongeBob just premiered for the first time, Pokemon just began their conquest over America, and Nintendo was cooking up a little spoopy ghost game idea they had. The game itself began production well into the era of the Nintendo 64, but by the time they did finally leave the conception stage, the team realized the game would be far too grand in scope for the current system's hardware to handle. So, production of the game was moved to Nintendo's upcoming and yet-to-be-revealed console simply named Project Dolphin, or what would later be known as the GameCube. At this point, the concept of the game was still a little in the air. In early concepts, Mario was suggested to be the protagonist in this ghost wrangling game, as throwing Mario at literally anything usually works. Throw him at soccer, he'll figure it out. Though this was later changed to Luigi, since as a character, Luigi wasn't as developed compared to his brother. Like, everyone knew who Mario was already. A courageous and brave young man who would stand up to any challenge. Typically, it's saving a princess from a giant turtle with dating issues. But this wouldn't have fit the style for the game in particular. So Luigi was cast instead and given his signature scaredy cat personality that we know and love from him today. Then came Space World 2000, an event for the newly unveiled Nintendo GameCube where the game was shown to the public for the first time. Kind of. The video shown for the event had many other Nintendo IPs like Metroid and Zelda being shown in their own sort of game. However, Nintendo went on to clarify after the event that none of these games were necessarily confirmed to be in production, as it was just meant to be a general showcase of the actual power of the GameCube itself, which they were half lying about. Obviously, we know that this footage of Luigi running from ghosts ended up being an actual game, or, you know, I wouldn't be making this video about it. But other clips shown at this event weren't as such, like the Zelda one, which showed a shot of an adult Link fighting head-to-head with the King of Evil Ganondorf himself. This obviously got fans incredibly excited for a more epic and realistic take on the series, which also got fans incredibly mad when their first look into the next generation of Zelda was... It wasn't until E3 2001 where it turned out that Luigi Ghost game that was shown off before was actually going to become a game. This is incredible! Maybe this means that Zelda one might have been a real game too! Luigi's Mansion, along with the GameCube, was finally released on September 14th, 2001 in Japan, November 18th, 2001 in North America, and May 2002 in Europe and Australia. When it did come out, the game itself was a little divisive. General opinions upon its release were rather negative at the time. Though, over the years, the game started to get looked back on rather fondly. It was such a spookily charming game that took a new crazy idea and ran with it. One of the biggest critiques back in the day was just the fact of it being the GameCube's launch title instead of a flagship Mario title. It is possible that fans would have liked it more upon release if, let's say, Mario Sunshine came out before it. However, the game did garner a cult following a few months later, so either way it worked out. Now before we get started talking about the game itself, here's a quick little summary of the story. Luigi wins a mansion in a contest he didn't enter, and instead of being the sensible one, Mario just vanishes into the wilderness to get there before he does. Luigi follows the map he was mailed through a twisted dead forest before eventually finding his incredibly inviting mansion. Upon approaching the large, intimidating house before him and heading inside, he's met with a rather unkempt, dusty, decrepit foyer. All the doors are apparently locked, leaving him stuck inside this one room. Though, when he tries to open the door leading to the parlor, an ominous laugh could be heard from downstairs. Heading back to the ground floor, however, thank you. Using said key on the parlor door brings us face to face with this orange entity from before. But just as it begins to slowly approach Luigi, meet Professor Elvin Gadd, an inventor and ghost researcher around this neck of the woods. He asks Luigi what led him to such a cryptid-looking place in the middle of nowhere. But I mean, he could probably ask the exact same thing. Though, before they can continue to bicker on, however, a group of ghosts appear, forcing the two to bolt out the mansion. After fleeing to the old man's research laboratory, they finally have a moment to discuss formalities. It's incredible he just had this nearby the mansion, especially so close, right? Well, Gadd actually lived in this forest conducting his research since his 20s with no real issue. But that mansion they just escaped from, well, that just showed up about a few days ago. Apparently, a group of dastardly ghosts attacked him and freed a bunch of his spirits that Gadd had captured from all over the world, and in turn, they created the mansion that they saw before him. Upon getting a good look at the green-clothed plumber in front of him, he's reminded of a red plumber in similar overalls that bolted into the mansion without a second thought. The two then come to an understanding, and Gadd suggests a plan of action. He'll teach Luigi how to deal with these escaped spirits since Gadd clearly can't hold his ground like he used to. Of course, wanting to save his brother in any way he can, Luigi gladly accepts the aid. It's a pretty strong opening. Despite Luigi's Mansion definitely not being a horror game, it definitely takes a couple of the horror elements and tropes and does it masterfully. Our introduction to the mansion itself is quick and quiet. There's no music playing, nor any bright cheery lights and such like your typical Mario title. It's a dark, creepy foyer with nothing but the sound of rain outside and flashes of lightning peering through the windows. It almost gives me Resident Evil vibes with the Spencer Mansion in that game and how its introduction is actually done in a similar manner, which is heightened by this game's door opening animations. Every time Luigi goes to either check a locked door or open a locked door, we get this hyper-realistic scene of Luigi slowly using the key he found to unlock the door, then hesitatingly putting his hand on the knob and opens the door. You can literally see his hand visibly shake with a sense of dread before putting that fear aside to push on forward. I love these animations! They add such a great amount of suspense and do an incredible job at pushing more of this game's creepy atmosphere. It's clearly inspired off of Resident Evil's approach with their door opening animations. However, I'd say this game just does it better. The added detail of the character going to open the door and such in a first-person point of view just adds a whole new layer of immersion into this world. Also, you can skip these unlike Resident Evil. The game itself is broken into 4 main acts, each of which requires a shaped key to unlock a thorn door to progress. You basically clear up all the rooms, beat a boss ghost, obtain a key, return back to Gadd to deposit your ghost and see how much you f***ing suck, and re-enter the mansion. Now, I know what you're thinking. Red, wouldn't that kind of make the mansion feel a lot smaller since you can only do specific areas at a time? When you do open a new area, it just means you have so much more room to explore. The area before does become illuminated, however, you will be returning to these areas as specific rooms and such are intentionally excluded from their specific act to be explored later. It's almost like a little teaser. You see it, it's on the map, you know it's there, but you can't access it. Perhaps there's something I missed, or maybe there's a key in an area that I've yet to explore. Usually it's the latter. It makes it fun when you do finally get a key for said area, and it makes you kind of go, oh yeah, that room. It makes backtracking rather fun, which this game does have a good sum of. Now, I know backtracking itself is a rather mixed topic, but my guy, you're in a goddamn mansion. You're intended to backtrack and explore every nook and cranny of this place. It's a large area, but not where it's a chore necessarily to retrek on old ground. It's like going through an old home you've started to become familiar with. It feels natural and is even exciting to see something new in said familiar place. Sometimes though, the main fun factor is finding more of this game's real goal. Capitalism. Money is a very important factor in this game. Shake some furniture? Money. Water a plant? Money. Destroy the loving relationship of a ghost couple? Money. There's money in every little nook and cranny of this place, and most rewards you get in-game just add to that total counter. There's also blue ghosts and golden mice you can find through just simply exploring every spot in a dark room. That rewards you with a hefty sum, as long as you don't f it up. On a first playthrough though, it's not entirely clear what the money's meant to be used for, yet you still have that sort of primal urge to find and collect every little piece of money you can possibly find, because we as people crave what we don't have. The gameplay structure itself heavily plays into why this game is so highly regarded for most people, as it's incredibly important for a game to feel good to help entice you to play again and again. However, the gameplay itself is not entirely what gives this game its charm. It's a large factor, don't get me wrong, but I would argue that a lot of that charm is more chalked up from this game's atmosphere. Every room in the mansion has a purpose. Each one has a vibe of feeling well lived in, with a great sense of age, despite the mansion being literally younger than the baby living in the house. It gives off a feeling of familiarity, and honestly, I'm unsure if that's more due to my own nostalgia from it, or if it naturally does for most people. The mansion itself was based off a dollhouse, which you can clearly see that inspiration with the way the camera follows Luigi. The camera never moves from its base position, but instead adjusts the room presented to keep that feeling, as well as not making you feel sick. If this game ended up being third person, it would 100% clip behind or even get stuck behind furniture constantly due to the complexity of the mansion itself. Have y'all played Sunshine? Now the actual design of the structure itself is it's just so iconic. It's so imposing on the landscape by being on the top of the tallest hill. The beams and the structure of the mansion itself make it feel larger than life. It's a typical art trick where you make a structure smaller in size the further it goes up to give a sense of intimidation by the scale. This is usually done with just the way you draw something, but it's baked into the structural integrity of the mansion itself. That, combined with its wavy, uneven architecture and even two glowing windows giving the look of eyes, gives such an imposing feel for it. It almost feels otherworldly, yet familiar somehow, which is beautifully tied together with this game's music. What you're listening to right now is a track called Dark Hallway. It has such an underlining feeling of dread with the deep strings, but with that sort of spooky, whimsical feeling given by the organ, a very typical, even stereotypical musical instrument used for all things spooky. It creates such a nice mixture when used in tandem, though this isn't the full theme, as Luigi himself was actually kept in mind while making the music. Dark Hallway itself uses Luigi's humming of the main chorus as the highlight of the song, including having moments of pause to bring more emphasis to Luigi's humming before complementing it with the deep strings. It's such a masterful way to do it, and just adds so much to Luigi as a character, how he uses humming as a way to keep himself calm under pressure. Another detail I love is the absence of music when a room is cleared, just leaving us with Luigi's whistling. Which surprisingly sells that sort of calmness of a lit room and such. Still a bit of unease from the silence, but kept rather joyful with the whistling, making an area feel properly safe in comparison. Another area I'd love to highlight is the exteriors. In Area 3, past the Clover Door, introduces us to the courtyard, a nice foliage-filled area on the backside of the mansion. Though it's filled with darkness and a couple of these ceiling ghosts, it's a rather somber-looking area in comparison to the rest of the mansion, and the music beautifully reflects that. being a much more somber rendition of the main theme with the use of a harp instead of strings, giving off a rather relaxing yet mysterious vibe. It's such a nice complementary contrast with the more deep and intimidating feeling giving off by its interior. Throughout this area as well, we're meant to find a plethora of items belonging to Mario. His letter, shoe, hat, glove, social security, and most importantly, his power star. You ever just have the power equivalent to God in your suitcase? Anyway, most of these items you just kind of randomly find throughout the area. The star, however, is a bit of an interesting one. This is the observatory. It's small and quaint, with nothing but a lone telescope peering out of one of the nearby windows. We're able to peer through this telescope, seeing the sheer multitude of stars littered across the night sky, before leading our eye to the lone moon above. After finding it, the walls themselves crumble around, revealing a cosmic space. We can then walk to the outer edge of this ruined floor, vacuum up one of the falling stars nearby, and they commit terrorism. A bridge made of light is created, allowing us to walk to the broken remains of the moon and grab Mario's star. This room is like a core memory in my mind. It's almost like a nice break in between the terror. A nice, beautiful room and a nice subversion to the darkened, ghost-filled corridors that we're used to. Which, speaking of ghosts, the ghosts of this game do such a great job at not only being fun and challenging to go up against, but also work incredibly well with complementing the eerie feeling of the setting itself. There are three major types: common ghosts, portrait ghosts, and boos. Let's start with common ghosts. They each have a certain charm about them. Like, just look at them. They each clearly have a cartoonish appearance, obviously not horrifying in any way, and yet they still have a little bit of creep factor in there. Like, despite this cartoonish appearance, those soulless eyes give off such a feeling of maliciousness that just adds so much to the creepy atmosphere of this cartoonish game. They're perfect. They teeter on that perfect line of whimsical yet unsettling, something that its sequel, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, actually failed to capture in comparison. Like, the Evershade Valley ghosts, for example, have none of the layers of the original. They're incredibly plain and simple, to the point. They're much more on that cartoonish side of things, which I would actually argue comes to a detriment of the game. Dark Moon is a more whimsical kind of spook in comparison to its predecessor. However, there are a good amount of moments that do give off a little bit of that same creep factor like the original, but it's ruined when these guys are usually the things that pop out. Luigi's Mansion 3's ghosts, on the other hand, are much more interesting in comparison to Dark Moon, and I would even say somewhat rekindle that magic. However, overall, they still don't really hit the same level. They lean much more into their cartoonish side, which is not a bad thing, but it does make these ghosts in particular come off much less uncanny, which was what gave the original ghosts so much of their charm. Well, I mean, at least to me. Especially when one of these guys is just cube. The sounds and mannerisms of the ghosts from both games are incredibly different as well. Here's an example of how the ghosts act in Luigi's Mansion 3. And now here's the original. 3 has a much more of a whimsical, expressive approach. The ghosts come off as incredibly goofy, almost like characters from a Saturday morning cartoon. This may sound like I'm presenting it as a negative, but I actually really love this approach, especially because 3 in comparison is a much more lighthearted and beautifully expressive game that these ghosts fit perfectly for the vibe with. However, the original ghost variants sound much more like, well, ghosts. They have wavy and even aggressive sounding voices that make them feel much more dangerous in comparison. Not to mention that the mannerisms feel much more unhinged. They actually use the cartoonish nature of these ghosts as a way to add to the unsettling vibe. The ceiling ghosts are actually the best example of this. Take a listen. Now the portrait ghosts in comparison are a definite step up, not only in difficulty, but also the way you approach them. The portrait ghosts were spirits that Gadd had captured over the years and turned, as the name suggests, into portraits to contain them. However, something had released them from his gallery, causing them to run amok. Your goal is to capture each one of them so they can return to their painterly forms. Each portrait ghost acts almost like a puzzle boss. There's a specific requirement for each one in order to reveal their heart and begin the suckening. Some can be as simple as opening a window to let a draft in, solving a musical quiz, or roasting a man alive. In order to learn each of their weaknesses, you can use the Gameboy Horror to scan their hearts to see a small piece of dialogue from their inner thoughts that provide a hint on how to beat them. I love these fights. There's a nice little puzzle to each one of them, and it can be incredibly fun to try to figure them out. These guys are also no joke on the ghost hunting side. They'll slide you clean across the floor, drop mini mushrooms that shrink you and disable your poltergust, or even fire projectiles at you to shake you off. There's ghosts like a 40-year-old man and his wife, a ghost couple dancing, butler desperately trying to get on his master's will, a musically inclined girl, ghost dog, laser-eyed Nana, jug guy, clockwork soldiers, a f***ing baby. Overall, the portrait ghosts are such a great addition, and a great sum of the ways to beat them is incredibly engaging, such as the musical girl, for example. In order to summon her, you have to interact with every instrument in the room to where a familiar theme begins to play. She then plays yet another familiar song and quizzes you on it, basically testing your knowledge of older classic Mario titles, which is just such a great concept. However, they're definitely not perfect. There's a few ghosts I would argue are a bit of a slog to fight and can be extremely annoying on a repeated playthrough. The Nana, for instance, has these yarn balls you're meant to suck up and fire at her while she zooms around the room firing her laser-eyed implants to attack you. The fight isn't hard, it's more so just annoying you have to grab and fire all 3 balls of yarn, as aiming and shooting literally anything in this game can just be so clunky. My least favorite fights in this game, besides one, was the Nana, the Billiards guy, and Bogmire, the Area 2 boss. Can you guess what all 3 of these bosses have in common? Honestly, I do love Bogmire as a boss concept, since I argue he's the most out-of-place ghost in the entire game. He's not really based on a person who's passed, yet he's not really a common ghost type either. He's just kinda there, and honestly, I can appreciate that. The fight itself is dog shit. It's mostly just due to the fact that the aiming mechanics of this game once again just feel incredibly clunky and unresponsive at times. It also just feels every time I have a clear aim at him, he's way further off than I thought, which checks out with how many times I had to actually blow up the moon in the observatory. The portrait ghosts themselves are rather interesting as a concept, mostly because they're well assumed to have been actual living people beforehand. I mean, sounds self-explanatory, right? I mean, that's literally what ghosts are. But games later in the series are actually rather different in that notion. The ghosts in Dark Moon, for example, are just, well, they're just there. None of them are necessarily distinct from one another. And in 3, though there is an equivalent to portrait ghosts with the boss ghosts of each floor, none of them really have a backstory of any kind hinted at, and just genuinely seem to be normal residents of the Last Resort Hotel. 2 and 3's portrayal of ghosts more so appear to have been born ghosts rather than have been actual living people with documented existences. Each portrait ghost as well comes with a little entry about them after you capture them, which I just want to highlight is such a nice detail. Like, these weren't super necessary, not to mention they're pretty easy to pass up on a first playthrough. I'll be honest, I played this game a trillion times as a kid and I never once knew this panel existed. But I really appreciate them, and it makes each ghost feel much more interestingly distinct from one another, such as Nerval, who spends his afterlife reading all the books he missed while he was living. Or that Madame Clairvoyant's connection to the spirit world lets her see nearly 49 days into the future. They may mostly be random or even pointless facts, but I'd argue they add a lot to the world, making each ghost feel much more alive despite, Though I would like to point out a couple other of my favorites that I just thought were genuinely interesting, such as Mr. Lugs, who ate himself to death but still wasn't satisfied, which, goddamn man, chill. There's one of Bogmire that describes him as being a product of the mansion's fear and despair, but he's not really sure what to fear or what to despair these days. And finally, there's one about this little girl simply named Sue P, the dozing girl. What was meant to be a short nap seems to have turned into eternal rest for sweet Sue P. E for everyone, by the way. Now, boos, they're Alright, so pretty much every room in the mansion outside of the hallways and the foyer have a Boo lurking within them after Luigi accidentally, kinda stupidly releases all of them in the beginning of Area 2. Though they only appear after a room has been cleared. Then you're supposed to use your Boo dowsing rod thing on your Game Boy Horror to locate each piece of furniture they may be hiding in. Through shaking said furniture, a Boo will appear for you to catch. Now, the catching mechanics of Boos are different. Boos don't get the same push and pull factor of specter fishing like common ghosts do. You just kinda chip away at their health while they freak out and try to flee constantly. You don't really have any way to keep them in a specific area. In fact, they'll typically attempt to move into other rooms, causing you to have to track them down. Now, on paper, this sounds decently challenging. The idea of having to chase down the ghost through the mansion as one big game of cat and mouse sounds like a great idea. It wasn't. In practice, though, it can get incredibly annoying to capture these guys, especially in the latter half of the game where their health is well into the triple digits. Here's a little bit of trivia you didn't know about. You can chip away at their health incredibly quickly when a room is lit. However, if they flee into a dark corridor or an uncleared room, it can bring the entire wrangle to a snail's pace. I'd say the strategy here is to try to direct them towards a light-filled area, though the only way you can even kinda do this is by running in front of the room you don't want them to enter to kind of deter them, but this has only really worked a couple of times for me personally. They as well can enter rooms or even areas you can't even access yet, forcing you to have to come back to them later, which can be super tedious. However, the Boos in Area 4 are downright awful to capture. Most of them have a health pool of upwards to 400 HP. But on top of that, these areas have rooms that are solely closed off from nearby hallways, usually forcing you to have to tread through a room or two to actually capture them. Here's my show and tell. They're definitely not all like this. A good some of the Boos are decently fine to capture, but I can say with absolute certainty that the way that they handle the Boos in the sequels are leagues better in my eyes, and it's purely just because they don't constantly f off into other rooms. Jeez, I kinda got lost on a tangent there, didn't I? How about we delve back into something else, like the balcony. This is one of my favorite spots in the mansion. It's another exterior, so it's rather quaint and quiet, just like the core. Well, that's a little strange. Why is it just... What the fuck? This is Boolossus, and he is without a doubt the worst boss in the entire game. Okay, I'm just gonna break down exactly why I don't like this fight. In concept and visual wise, it looks cool. It's a clear play on the big Boo that's been seen in plenty other Mario games before, like Super Mario World and such. And in the first half of the fight, it's decently simple. Boolossus attempts to try to crush you, and you can use your vacuum to hold it for a time and direct it towards one of the unicorn statues in the area, splitting it back apart. You can then use your ice abilities to freeze all the small ones to vacuum them up. The latter half of the fight, however, becomes such a monotonous slog as the smaller Boos avoid you more and more, making it increasingly difficult to freeze any of them, as the millisecond you take out that poltergust, they scurry away faster than my self-esteem. I've had so many times, both as a kid and as a semi-adult, where the end part of this boss takes a good 5 to 10-ish minutes alone. I usually can only beat this fight through just random luck of one of the Boos deciding that is badass and bolting straight into the ice without me noticing. Like, I can see this fight being where most kids got stuck and just put the game down forever. Hell, I could see the same thing for just any adult. Alright, I need a break from me wanting to strangle Boos with my bare paws. The game itself has a lot of little things that just kinda happen, but don't really have a direct reasoning other than just being supernatural. And honestly, that mysteriousness of the unexplained adds so much to the overall haunting feel. For example, this mirror warp thing. Essentially, throughout the game, you're able to scan any object or person and usually get a little quip from Luigi saying, yeah, that's a wall. But if you're curious enough to scan one of the many mirrors throughout the mansion, and you basically just found a fast travel. There's nothing in the game that alludes to this, nor anyone in particular that tells you about teleporting mirrors. There's also no real explanation for it other than just being chalked up to ghost shit, and honestly, I really miss that factor from these games. Then there's Madame Clairvoyant, pretty much the only friendly ghost in the entire mansion. There's never really a direct reasoning as to why she's friendly, but it's well shown that she clearly has more of a passion to just be the bridge between the mortal and spirit worlds and assist anyone that wishes to find someone close to them. But who are the spirits she's conversing with? I mean, all the other spirits in the mansion clearly hate Luigi, so they aren't any of the ones we've encountered. Why does it feel like all the ghosts are all a part of a larger family? I mean, Gadd directly states that every portrait ghost he found was from a different part of the world, and yet it feels like they share a life with one another here. This mansion honestly feels like it has way more history than it should for being like 2 days old. If you pay close attention to the intro cutscene of Area 1 with the paintings, you can recognize they're actually paintings of the different ghosts we've encountered across the mansion. Like here's Lydia, Shivers the butler, Nana, Nervel, and at the very center is a ghost I haven't highlighted yet. Vincent van Gogh, the artistic creator of all the common ghosts in the game. He's also broke as which shows him as basically the head of the entire house. I know it's more so shown that they just made this place randomly just cause they had a common hatred for some old guy with a thing for paintings, but still, it makes you wonder a bit if this place might have actually been more real than we originally thought. Future games in the series don't really have this unexplained ghost shit like this one does. Honestly, most things that happen in this game have a direct reasoning as to why they're happening. It may still be ghost shit, but it's ghost shit that usually has a direct tie to it, shown one way or another. In the original game though, things like this just kind of go unexplained or glossed over, and in my opinion, it adds so much to this being an actual haunted house. The whole thing about a supernatural location is that the stuff can happen with no real reason other than being ghosts. There's fake doors that slam you against the wall, chandeliers that fall with purpose, or even this. Now, if we want to talk about the unexplained, how about we finally talk about our main adversary? Good old King Boo. Who the f is this guy? We just kind of know him as the King of Boos and nothing else, which is weird. Throughout the entire game, we only hear some dialogue talking about him from Gadd and Clairvoyant. The first real time we see him, after releasing him stupidly, is the cutscene we see in the well, which shows he's the one who captured Mario. Though, when we obtain the final key to the basement, we're finally met face to face with this head honcho that started it all. Hi, hello, welcome to the final boss. A final confrontation with King Boo piloting the puppet body of the King of Koopas. It's probably one of the most peak fights, to be honest. Now, the fight itself has Bowser throwing several detonatable spiked balls towards Luigi. If you grab one and shoot it right at his face when he comes down, his f***ing head pops off, which then reveals King Boo, from which then you can start to vacuum him up. If there was ever a moment in this game that probably scared the absolute shit out of little Timmy, it was probably this moment. Or this one. The fight itself isn't something incredibly complex when you get down to it, but I would argue it's still one of the best fights in the series. I mean, the roof being the arena and there just being constant fire surrounding us honestly gets to a point of being downright demonic. Now then, couple of interesting tangents here. Why does King Boo have a fursuit? At least I think it's a suit. At the time of this game coming out, it kind of seemed like this was Bowser. I mean, the only other Mario game to release before this one, at least mainline, was Mario 64, where we had basically, I guess, killed Bowser? In fact, Madame Clairvoyant makes a comment earlier on with a statement of, "I thought Mario had soundly defeated Bowser," suggesting he was supposed to be dead?
He's supposed to be dead!
Yeah, weird.
Obviously, this didn't turn out to be the case, since Mario Sunshine immediately followed up on Bowser's mortality. But it's still an interesting thought, especially since King Boo states himself that the brothers caused him so much trouble in the past, suggesting a history? Now, I mean, they could easily be talking about the Big Boo from all the other games, but still. I think it's honestly possible that King Boo was supposed to be Bowser originally, but was retconned since, I mean, they weren't just gonna kill off one of their main characters like that. Little Timmy already has enough trauma. But I still think it's a little interesting to think about who King Boo truly is. Or more so, what he was meant to be. Nonetheless, after Luigi finishes giving kids around the world nightmare fuel, he sucks up King Boo and leaves only but his crown. The Bowser puppet falls to the ground, and the illusion dissipates. When Luigi finally returns to the mortal realm, Gadd immediately calls to see if Luigi is alright, as he had gone completely radio silent since the skirmish began. Luigi then turns to retrieve Mario, who appears to have passed out from relief and exhaustion after seeing his brother arrive. Luigi then goes to grab his brother's painting. Upon returning to deposit the last few ghosts from his poltergeist, Gadd comments that though the mansion wasn't real, it appears that money sure was, and tells Luigi that he may do whatever he wishes with it after all of this is over. But with that, the two deposit the last few ghosts, and the game tallies up its final score.
Aww. Oh,
Yo,
it hurt.
That is such a.
Oh, that is you pieces of shit. What?
You have the V mansion.
No.
And now, the best cutscene in the entire game.
Mamma mia.
One thing I did forget to praise through all of this is this game's replayability. This game has a rank system. After the horrors of the night, Gadd steals Luigi's credit card to help build him a brand new mansion. The mansion you get is solely dependent on the rank you achieve, and that rank is tallied through your final amount of gold collected. Most likely, your first playthrough will get you a rank C or D mansion, which rather entices players to try again and maybe check every nook and cranny for money. Maybe you missed a few spots, maybe there was a room you didn't know about, or maybe a couple blue ghosts you might have missed. I wouldn't know anything about that. The game heavily encourages this, and even has a bit of a new game plus in the form of the Hidden Mansion for the PAL version. The original version wanted to have the Hidden Mansion at launch for all versions, but due to the set release schedule for it in Japan and North America, the original didn't really have the time to fully flesh it out. But the PAL version had to be pushed back for localization issues, so the team decided to throw in a little extra bonus for the European Australian crowd who had to wait an extra 6 months for the game to release in their countries. Luigi's Mansion is not a long game. A casual playthrough can usually be about 6 hours. However, if you know where you're going, it can be beaten in just under 4, but its length heavily adds to that replayability, unlike the sequels. Luigi's Mansion 3 uses the same rank system, and though I am very happy they brought it back, it just doesn't entice me as much to repeat a playthrough. Why, you ask? Well, because the game's 13 hours long. That's a commitment. Luigi's Mansion 1 may be small in comparison, but that by no means is a bad thing. I see Luigi's Mansion 1 being more like an arcade game of sorts, and entices you to try again and again to find better routes and ways to make the most amount of moolah you can. And a quick 4 hours to kill every so often is a much easier pill to swallow than an entire 13-hour game. This game will always be special to me. It's such a fun, spooky time with so much love and charm put into every little aspect about it. I feel now is actually a little great time to just talk about Luigi himself as a character. Luigi, without a doubt, is a scaredy cat. This is baked into his very core, which you see throughout the entire game, hell, the entire series. He jumps from something as small as a ghost rat and constantly is put on edge from every little thing he runs into amidst the mansion. Yet, despite all of that, Luigi, by all means, is no coward. He may have been constantly on edge, jump every time a ghost pops up, and almost always seem to be on the verge of running far away from anything. He doesn't. Luigi, despite his fearful nature, stands his ground. He shows us that no matter what, he'll do whatever it takes. He whistles to himself to keep himself calm, he always gives a radiating smile every time he clears a room, and despite his hesitation, he still pushes through his fears and opens that door. Why, you ask? Because despite the fear of haunted mansions and darkened covered hallways, his unbreakable will to save his brother circumvents all of it. A coward is a person who lacks the courage to do or endure dangerous or unpleasant things. Luigi could have bolted, fled far away from the mansion before even stepping in, but he doesn't. And that is what makes Luigi such a perfect protagonist, a quality of which the sequels actually understood. I mean, the man literally adopts a ghost dog and gets constantly scared by it, but still loves it and takes care of it despite his fear, an equivalent being an arachnophobe taking care of a tarantula. Through thick and thin, this game will always be one of my favorite games of all time. And though I do love the current games in the series with their more cartoonish vibe and variety in designs, I don't think they'll ever top that perfect, creepy, and unsettling feeling that this game invoked for me. But you know what? I'm still happy with where the series ended up nonetheless. And though I'd still love for a return to form, I'm still happy and eagerly awaiting to see where this green plumber and his ghost dog bring me next.